It's my pleasure to introduce Laith Alkhouri. Did I get that right? Not too bad. Okay. Laith is the co-founder and senior director of advanced intelligence at Flashpoint, which is a business risk intelligence company based out of New York. He heads Flashpoint's advanced and customized intelligence solutions for a range of government and commercial clients, which focuses on understanding risk posed by terrorist and cyber crime threat actors. Please welcome Laith to the stage.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming for my talk. I'd like this to be more informal, and so feel free to interrupt me at any time. There might be a lot of data points to discuss, and if I don't make sense at any point, please keep me honest. A little bit about my background. My background is in counterterrorism and counterintelligence. I started early on trying to understand how threat actors supportive of terrorist groups as well as terrorist groups themselves, how they operate in the cyber domain. That goes back to the days of post 9/11. Early on, we realized that threat actors were gathering in environments that were closed to the public, protected, vetted environments behind password-protected walls. And they were proliferating there where they were sharing tactics, techniques, and procedures. They were networking, trying to raise funds for terrorist activities. Now, most governments and enterprise companies were completely unaware of what was going on. But that kind of threat activity was causing damage on the ground because these individuals were networking and then finally going from the cyber realm to the battlefield. And so if law enforcement intelligence agencies were aware of these environments, they would have been able to take proper action in a more proactive manner. Now, why is that relevant to security at large? Well, first of all, because I would say cybersecurity or cyber threat intelligence at large has always been reactive. A threat actor does something, an attack or a breach, we react to it, we patch systems, and then we wait for the next incident so we can respond to it. Well, that's dandy and all. We need incident response. But if we're always responsive without being proactive, then we're expending and exhausting resources. And that's not good because it's going to take a toll on us. Now, as cyber threat actors and criminals are becoming smarter and more brazen, they're innovating ways by looking at the security landscape and they're saying, okay, I can see a vulnerability here, I can see a gap here, so I can take advantage of that. So being proactive as a threat hunter becomes crucial to government entities, to companies at large, to understand the threat before it reaches your door. And so the premise of business risk intelligence is to be proactive in understanding the threat. So by having this kind of business risk intelligence model, you're able to empower units across multiple organizations to have a decision advantage. And that's really crucial because we always need a decision advantage when we're dealing with any kind of adversarial threat. The premise here is that this threat activity is not taking place in the cyberspace environment is massive, but it's also, there are multiple watchdogs who are looking at these threat activities, whether it's social media or blogs or other places. But because threat actors need both to create an audience and have a follower base, but also they need to protect themselves against the watchdogs of government, they need to confine themselves in areas that are very difficult to reach. Areas like the deep and dark web, encrypted chat environments, and message boards. So early on, we realized that when they are proliferating in these environments, we need to be embedded in these environments to understand the threat directly from the source before we get it from a second hand source. We don't need a journalist to report on it. We'd like to understand it directly from the source. It's an area where there is something called peer pressure and peer support. The very individuals who are supporting you in your threat activity are the very individuals who are also pressuring you to conduct terrorist attacks or cyber attacks and so on. So having this kind of visibility into these threats and the actors behind them, their tactics, techniques, and procedures becomes absolutely critical to any decision making in the security business. You probably heard the terms that, the deep and dark web, and how it's an environment where a lot of threat actors are operating, from terrorists to cyber criminals to hackers and hacktivists to insider threat actors who are within organizations trying to do harm to their own employers, and so on. When we compare that to what we know as the surface web or the open web, this is the indexed environment. Search engines like Google, Bing, and others are able to index these environments, and they become searchable. Well, threat actors don't like that. They'd like to bypass the scrutiny, so they confine themselves in these areas that are not indexed by search engines, areas that are confined and behind password-protected walls, vetted environments where, in order for you to become a member of these environments, you need to go through a vetting process that allows you to become a member. So we are essentially undercover agents in the cyber domain, embedding ourselves, essentially cyber rubbing shoulders with the threat actors themselves, so we can understand what they're all about. When we look at the surface web, we look, just as an example, Facebook. There are, I think, right now over 2 billion Facebook accounts. Well, that's a lot of data, but it has very little context. How do you sift between all of this data to understand where threat activity is emanating from, and who are the threat actors behind them? When we look at the deep and dark, or the illicit deep and dark web environments, what we call its signal-rich environment. It's because when you are in that criminal underground, most people there are not observers. These are hardline individuals who would like to actually take action. They're behind the gain, whether it's an ideological gain or a financial gain, or even just to boast their achievements and taunt governments and point out their weaknesses. So when we look at the deep and dark web, the threat actors who are communicating with each other, networking, and so on, that becomes the difference between looking at trying to find one needle in multiple haystacks, that's the open web, or when you look at the deep and dark web, it's finding multiple needles in every haystack that you're investigating. As an example, if we look at cyber criminals in dark web marketplaces or black markets, these are individuals who are not just observing. They're trying to sell illicit products and services like databases or fraudulent documents or fake currency and others. So the harder to obtain intelligence, the more important it becomes. I hope this makes sense. Any questions so far? Okay. So if I were to move on, I mentioned how traditional CTI is reactive, but it's also confined only to cyber threat intelligence and network security, which is absolutely important. But we don't want to just look at threat. We want to look at risk. Threat is only one part of risk. So at Flashpoint, we'd like to look at the threat activity that involve also things like fraud, affecting financial institutions at large, affecting organizations that deal with money at large. Corporate and physical security becomes absolutely crucial because this is not only about cyber attacks. This is about ideologically influenced actors who would like to cause physical damage. But of course, they have to have a cyber domain in order to proliferate network and so on. And also insider threat, which I just mentioned, individuals within organizations who are wittingly or unwittingly leaking databases or exposing the network of their own organizations. So this is a little skewed because we had to change the format. But what I like, the term I coined, the Intelligence Trifecta, is trying to understand the source of the information, trying to understand the actor behind that information, and then adding context to understand what is it all about. Essentially, the so what question or the why question To answer that becomes really critical to understand the threat. So if you're missing any of these points, then you don't have the full picture. Well, in the environments that we monitor, we look at the source of information. How reliable is this source? Is the information released there, is it legitimate? Can we take action? Is it meaningful enough that enables you to protect your own systems and your own constituents and your own employees and clients? The context is so crucial. It's not just about attribution, because it's very difficult many times to do attribution. But answering the so what question is all about long-term decision making. If you are able to understand the tactics, techniques, and procedures used today and potentially what they could be using tomorrow, then you're not behind the curve anymore. You're walking alongside the threat actors who want to do damage. I always say that, our advancement in cybersecurity or in security field at large is not done by security specialists. We're not the ones who are actually advancing our own understanding of security. It's the bad guys. It's the criminals who are advancing our understanding of cybersecurity. They look at the security landscape and they find the vulnerabilities and they attack, and then we react and so on. So we are advancing our learning curve because of what they are doing. So if we're able to think like them and walk along their side, then we could potentially anticipate the next step. So one of the cases I mentioned is insider threat, so I would like to dig deeper into this topic. So why do we need to pay attention to it? Well, insiders are, you could potentially find them in almost every organization. Financial sector, corporations at large, telecom, even government. Individuals who might be unhappy with their employer, individuals who would like to, in illicit ways, make financial gain because of where they're employed. These insiders like to network with like-minded individuals because they're able to have a win-win situation. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. If you're able to provide me with databases from this organization, then I can provide you with an access to money drops or cash outs from my bank. And it affects a range of industries. We talked about the financial sector, but also retail sector, stock market, telecom, and others. It's becoming one of the biggest threat factors, insiders in these organizations. And the individuals who are intentionally leaking this information or selling information, those are after a specific gain. But there are also the insiders who are unintentional or unwitting participants. It's because they're not protecting themselves when they're accessing certain areas of the internet. They're exposing the network of their own employers by not obfuscating or using a variety of ways like proxies or VPNs or others. And so the security-forward admins of illicit environments are able to take advantage of that and conduct attacks when you're not protecting yourself. So there are a variety of ways to look at insider threat. So as a simple use case, when we look at the environments that we're monitoring, these are very difficult to enter environments. You have to almost think like a criminal to become part of the criminal underground. So some of the findings, and this is just scratching the surface. There are thousands of insiders who are that we're monitoring today. As an example, a bank insider, somebody who's looking for insiders at a specific bank, like this individual. I'm looking for more bank insiders to work with. I have a couple, but I need more. He's trying to expand his field. When he's able to get an interested party, they're taking their communication and encrypted outside channels. They're able to essentially make a deal and say, I'm willing to offer you what you want, and you're able to offer me what I want. So let's talk on ICQ, or let's talk in over Jabber account, or something like that. So understanding the tactics, techniques, and procedures those insiders are using becomes, again, really critical to understand the threat landscape. Similarly, you can have insiders who are kind of conducting social engineering. So somebody who's saying, I need someone brilliant with social engineering to carry out reverse SOX connection to a specific US corporation. So essentially, you need to be on the inside of that corporation. So when they take that conversation outside, you say, which corporation are you looking for? I'm looking for this corporation. Do you know an insider there? Yes, I do. How much money does he want? What can he do for us? And so on and so forth. So all of this threat activity is taking place in a variety of places, from deep and dark web forums to encrypted chat services like Telegram to unencrypted chat services like Discord to even message boards. So it's a very expansive environment. Another one of those use cases is fraud. It's massive. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, illicit fraud. We're talking about not only black markets, we're not only talking about financially motivated hackers, but also we're looking at black markets that are specifically dedicated to selling fraudulent credit cards. So currently we monitor dozens of them. If we take the top 7 of them, just the top 7 today, over the past 30 days, they have released over 5 million leaked credit cards. The month before that, it was 10 million. The month before that, it was 18 million, affecting, of course, countries all around the world. The United States being the #1 target, but also here in Asia Pacific, it's a massive target for fraudsters. So they come up with proprietary schemes for credit card dumps. I mentioned cash outs and money drops in financial institutions. Coming up with web injects to steal data, and then you translate that into financial fraud. It's widely available. And it essentially creates a kind of a fusion center environment to prey on uninformed individuals and even massive enterprise companies. Because I've done work with a lot of different governments and a lot of different private sector entities, and they could be multi-million, multi-billion-dollar company, and they could be one of the most advanced government agencies in the world. But if they don't have access to these environments, if they're just unaware of what's going on there, then they're just missing. And that is an advantage for the cyber criminals. That's an advantage for the fraudsters. Fraud, it's interesting. Fraudsters, this is their full-time job. Many times they work more hours than I do, and I work a lot of hours. I have monitored certain fraudsters who've been around literally for years, and they are still operating. They haven't been caught because they are able to look, again, at the security infrastructure in place and say, well, I can obfuscate because they're not paying attention to this, they're not paying attention to that. So one of the use cases, as an example, out of the hundreds of thousands of examples that we've come across, Russian-speaking car shop owner. When I say car shop, I mean black market that's focused on financial fraud, is offering 400,000 bank accounts for $280,000. Now, $280,000 sounds like a lot of money, but it's really not. When you have access to 400,000 bank accounts, you can essentially make millions, if not hundreds of millions. Some of those bank accounts can have thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars. And neither the bank nor the account owners many times have an idea until it's, of course, too late. So my last use case is on violent non-state actors, which is really my expertise. I mentioned early on terrorist groups and their supporters proliferating. They understand as much as cyber criminals that the underground environments online are more protective of their identities. They're able to, again, network with like-minded individuals without having to worry about potentially security leaders or law enforcement or others being in these environments. And if they are in these environments, attributing that moniker to that identity becomes extremely difficult, many times impossible. So it is providing layers of security for them. And that's why they're able to network, purchase weapons, purchase fraudulent documents, conduct terror financing, really raise money through fraudulent activities like spamming, and then send that money to groups like ISIS or Al-Qaeda or the Pakistani Taliban or Shabab Mujahideen or many other groups. And we've seen real examples of that. Actually, just recently, we saw a new Al-Qaeda supportive media unit using Bitcoin for fundraising. Now, this is not the first time we see Bitcoin being used to fundraise terrorist activities, but it is now picking up even more. Because early on, Bitcoin was very difficult to understand for many people. Now, you can have 15-year-olds who understand exactly how Bitcoin works. As a matter of fact, I was walking down here in the Gold Coast, and I saw a liquor store that accepts Bitcoin to purchase liquor, which I thought was fascinating. And so the whole idea is that you utilize whatever available tools and means that are always it's a pool of resources, this environment, that allows you to download free software, have tutorials. You can easily download dozens of manuals that would allow you to go from somebody who has no idea how to be a terrorist or a cyber criminal to be somebody who can really obfuscate and bypass the scrutiny for many years. There's something called, or I call, terrorism on the go, as an example. Back in the day, in my early work here, it used to be very difficult for supporters of terrorist groups to obtain manuals, because what they have to do is they have to share an actual paper copy, and that was very difficult to come by. Sometimes they are written copies. And with the advent, of course, of technology and cyberspace, early on, it was to share manuals, you need to upload them to temporary upload servers, and then share the link, and then it's a password-protected link, and then share the 32-character password to download that manual. But of course, these are sites that are infested with pop-ups and many times even just difficult to navigate, and you might be downloading a malware. But of course, with the advancement of technology and having cloud services and so on, a terrorist or a supporter of terrorist group can have all of that on his phone. Is able to access really dangerous areas of the internet, like encrypted Telegram channels where ISIS and other groups are operating, and be able to just easily scroll through the searchable manual and look for a recipe to build a bomb or to train on AK-47 and others. And because it is such a prolific environment where hundreds of thousands of these individuals are operating, not only they're learning from each other, but they're able to share things like target endorsements. What are the best targets that would generate publicity for a terrorist group? What about a hit list? Let's put together a hit list that would generate so much publicity. We saw hackers supportive of ISIS release the personally identifiable information of thousands of people, including over 1,200 American government personnel. I'm talking about their name, their address, their phone numbers, their work address, and potentially some of those individuals might be undercover, their real identity. Well, how were they able to do it? One way of doing it is not through hacking, really, but collecting that information from social media. It's amazing. You might say, like, I use Facebook, but I only have a very limited number of friends. It's just for family members. It's confined in these environments. But do you know what your brother or sister or cousin or friend or others, how much they're protecting their Facebook account, or how much they're protecting their own Twitter account? Do they have two-factor authentication? Are they saying where they are sitting in which restaurant? Are they talking about the places they're visiting? Are they going on a vacation in a specific place? All of this data is easily accessible for those individuals. And lastly, when we have more security measures in place, and we try our best to understand the threat activity, we look at new targets like industrial control systems, SCADA systems, because while they are very difficult, almost impossible by many individuals to actually penetrate and hack, the violent non-state actors are looking at it from a different perspective. They're saying, if I am able to potentially recruit somebody within buildings where there is industrial control systems, then I could potentially hack it from the inside. So one example of kind of blurring the physical and cyber realm, individuals who are ideologically influenced, they're behind trying to cause physical damage, but they're advancing their cyber skill set. So one pro-ISIS hacker from a password-protected, vetted ISIS environment, who's, at the time I put this together, had nearly 1,200 postings. Most of it actually focused not on physical threat or physical activity. This is a software developer, ideologically influenced software developer, who decided that it is better to go in the cyber warfare realm instead of conduct actual physical attack. Well, because one, it can attract a lot of attention. We're seeing bombings happen in many different parts of the world and attacks and so on. But he's basically saying that if I am able to develop a tool that would hack a government domain, steal the data, and release it in public, that is generating so much more publicity, and it's elevating the notoriety of terrorist groups that I'm supporting. So he organized a DDoS campaign in this forum, and this forum is confined to about only 20,000 individuals, no more. So you can't be somebody who's like, I'm interested, I want to make a new account. No, it doesn't work that way. You need a recommendation by a specific user who's up in the ranks. So as I'm monitoring this activity, I come across 3 different tools that he developed. I talked about the DDoS tool, which he called Caliphate Cannon. I mean, it's kind of funny. But it is also dangerous because he used this tool to target 7 different government websites, successfully taking down the website of the Egyptian Ministry of Interior and the Iraqi Ministry of Oil. So these are the efforts of one individual on his own without backup. Now, they remain under-sophisticated in this domain, but all they're doing right now is that they're learning, they're advancing, and potentially they will be walking alongside non-ideologically influenced, really advanced cyber criminals, and then learn from them. So they can mask themselves. As cyber criminals, create accounts on black markets or in forums where there are financially motivated hackers, and then learn from their tactics, techniques, and procedures. Learn from the manuals they're releasing there, and then apply that against their own targets. So at Flashpoint, I mentioned the Intelligence Trifecta. So as I come across this activity, so understanding the source, first of all, this is an important source for ISIS. We have, over the years, validated how important the information there is. Then we look at the actor. How legitimate is that actor? So we take these tools, reverse engineer them, trying to understand what they do, what is the impact they can cause, and then essentially profile that actor. So when security leaders are looking at this profile and they're saying, okay, now I understand the recent or latest tactics, techniques, and procedures used by actors who are supportive of terrorist groups, yet they are advancing their cyber skill set, now I can actually put mitigation measures in place and potentially try to do attribution by understanding the code used in these tools, or trying to understand how long they've been operating, potentially have an actor engagement and actually talk to them to get more information. So the use cases that we practically applied, and this is just a snippet of it, from an insider threat, we were able to identify a rogue employee, as I mentioned, at a multinational technology company who was selling a source code of a non-released enterprise-level software. So what that did, by informing the client, we're preserving the intellectual property of that client. Similarly, for fraud, identified a scheme to exploit at the time the upcoming EMV. And the result, of course, being aware, is that you mitigated financial loss. From a physical security and executive protection, we identified a previously unknown threat actor within the vicinity of where a specific executive from a Fortune 100 company was about to be present and publicly present. By identifying this threat actor in that location, we're essentially protecting that executive by their security team putting mitigation measures in place. So this is my talk. Thank you so much for listening. I hope it was informative, and I'm open to any questions. Thank you.
Questions? At the end, you mentioned that when you come across information, say for executive protection or stopping IT theft, was this for customers you already had, or did you come across it and go, oh, I know who this belongs to, and then contact them?
Yeah, and it's a really good question. So we come across threats to thousands of companies worldwide, governments, and so on. So it becomes an exhaustive approach to notify everybody about every threat we come across. And because these environments are so full of threat, you could literally have a team of 100 people just informing others, like a data center, just literally giving everybody a call. So we don't do that. So it's usually an existing client. However, when we come across something of an imminent threat, that's something we are able to inform law enforcement about, and then softly reach to the prospect. Let's call them a prospect instead of a client. Reach to that prospect and say, there is an imminent threat we observed. We can't always validate or attribute, but we want to let you know that these are the TTPs they're talking about. They're talking about your event, and so on. So one example I can tell you, Disneyland in Paris, an individual supportive of ISIS released maps of every entry and exit point and said, on this day, there's going to be this massive attendance. So if you want to target a very legitimate target, this is actually really good. And here, let me also tell you who's attending. And so when we see something like that, it doesn't matter if the French government is a client of ours. We're able to, through our own contacts in law enforcement in a place like the United States or the UK or others, get that information across as fast as possible. So it can be both, but we can't inform every potential prospect because we just come across hundreds and thousands of them. I hope that answers your question. Yeah. Others? Well, great. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Laith.